My husband had forbidden me from ever setting foot on that farm. That's the line that's been echoing in my head since the funeral. Never go to Rosewood, Lillian. He said it with such weight years ago, like he was protecting me from something unspeakable. But when Edward died, his lawyer, Mr. Hanley, handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside was a golden key. "He said this belongs to you now, Mrs. Hartman," Hanley murmured, sliding a legal envelope across the desk. "Rosewood is yours." I stared at him, numb. Mine? The farm he'd guarded like a secret prison? The place I was never allowed to see? Never allowed to ask about? For 25 years, I'd been the loyal wife, the quiet woman behind a powerful man. Edward built empires. I built our home. I never asked questions, not when he disappeared for days, not when the phone rang at midnight, not even when he came home once, smelling of iron and fear, muttering, "Promise me, Lillian, never go to Rosewood." I promised, and I kept that promise until the day I buried him. When Hanley said, "It's yours," I almost laughed. What would I do with an old piece of land in Vermont? Probably sell it, donate the money. But something in the way he looked at me, cautious, almost afraid, made me pause. "There's one more thing," he added, tapping the envelope. "He said you'd understand when you saw what's inside." At home that night, I opened the envelope. The first thing I saw was Edward's handwriting, "For Lillian, trust no one." Then a single photograph slipped out, a large wooden door, faded red paint. The word Rosewood burned into it. My hands trembled. The key in my palm felt heavier than gold. Was it guilt? Fear? Or something deeper, something he didn't want me to find? The next morning, as the fog rolled over the valley, I packed a bag, slipped the key into my coat pocket, and whispered into the still air, "Edward, I'm sorry, but I need to know what you were hiding." I started the car, the photograph lying on the dashboard like a dare. And as the wheels turned, I realized whatever waited for me at Rosewood would change everything I thought I knew about my husband. Because sometimes, the person you love most leaves behind the kind of secret that doesn't die with them. The house was too quiet that night, the kind of silence that felt heavy enough to crush thought. I sat at Edward's old desk, the golden key glinting under the lamplight. The envelope Hanley had given me lay unopened beside a cup of untouched tea. Outside, rain whispered against the windows, a sound that made the world seem smaller, lonelier. I hesitated, running my fingers along the seal as if breaking it might wake something better left asleep. For 20 years I had obeyed him. I never went to Rosewood. I never questioned why. But death rewrites the rules. I tore the envelope open. Inside was a single folded letter written in his unmistakable hand. The ink had bled slightly at the edges, as if time had been weeping through the paper. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone," it began. "You've kept your word for 20 years. Now I release you from it. Go to Rosewood. What you find there will explain everything I couldn't." The words blurred for a moment as tears welled uninvited. I pressed the page to my chest and closed my eyes. His voice filled my head again, calm and distant. Never go to Rosewood. Only now, he was telling me to do the opposite. The key caught the light when I lifted it from the pouch. It wasn't just gold. It was engraved with delicate initials, RW, and an emblem I didn't recognize at first. When I turned it under the light, the truth shimmered back at me. It belonged to First Federal Trust, a bank Edward had worked with years ago. A key to more than land. A key to something he'd hidden from everyone. I felt the ground shift inside me. What kind of secret needed a golden key and a warning from beyond the grave? I reached for the photograph again, tracing the faded red door with my thumb. It looked older now, almost haunted. Edward's handwriting beside it whispered from the page, "Trust no one." A gust of wind rattled the window. The lights flickered once, then steadied. I looked around the room, half expecting to see him standing in the doorway, still holding all his secrets. "Why now, Edward?" I whispered. "Why me?" The answer was silence, the kind that echoes back louder than words. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into its envelope. The key I kept in my palm. It pulsed with warmth, or maybe that was my heartbeat. I placed it on the desk beside the photograph, and for a long time, I just stared. That key wasn't only metal, it was memory, guilt, love, and something like fear. The rain outside deepened, steady and unrelenting. I leaned back, closing my eyes, hearing his voice again, softer this time. Go to Rosewood. By the time the clock struck midnight, my decision was made. I would go. Whatever truth waited there, I needed to face it. Morning light crept through the curtains like an unwelcome guest. I hadn't slept. The letter sat on the table beside the key, both of them daring me to act. Instead, I dressed carefully, pinned my hair, and drove into town to meet with Ms. Alvarez. She had handled Edward's estate from the beginning, practical, composed, a woman who treated secrets like currency. Her office smelled of coffee and old paper. She greeted me with polite sympathy, but her eyes were already measuring what I might say. "Mrs. Hartman, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing toward the conference table. To my surprise, two familiar figures were already seated there, my daughter, Samantha, and her husband, Derek. They looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread, perfect smiles, expensive clothes, and a kind of anxious confidence that made the air too tight. "Mom," Samantha said, her tone too bright, "we just thought we should all be here together, to help with the transition." "The transition," I repeated slowly, taking the chair opposite them. My fingers brushed the golden key inside my pocket, the metal cool against my skin. Alvarez cleared her throat. "There's mention of a property, Rosewood Farm in Vermont. It appears Mr. Hartman recently reacquired it under your name." She glanced at her papers. "Based on current valuations, the estate and its mineral rights are worth over $12 million. The room went still. Samantha blinked, stunned. Derek leaned forward, his polished smile faltering. "$12 million?" "Yes," Alvarez replied. "But the title is solely in Mrs. Hartman's name." I watched Derek's jaw tighten. Samantha shifted in her seat. He placed a hand over hers, a subtle squeeze that looked protective but felt rehearsed. "That's a lot to manage," he said smoothly. "Maybe Mom shouldn't handle that kind of responsibility alone. We could help, of course, for her peace of mind." I almost smiled. For her peace of mind. How easily greed dressed itself as concern. "Edward thought I could handle it," I said evenly. "Why can't you?" Samantha's smile cracked. She looked at Derek, then back at me. "Mom, we just want what's best for you. Dad didn't tell us about this place, and now suddenly it's yours? It doesn't make sense." "Maybe he didn't tell you because it wasn't yours to know," I replied. The words hung between us, sharp as glass. Derek's charm slipped for a second. "We're just saying it might be better if we manage the sale. These things can get complicated." I leaned back, my voice quiet but steady. "So can intentions." Alvarez shifted her gaze between us, sensing the tension, but saying nothing. Her silence was its own kind of protection. When the meeting ended, Samantha avoided my eyes. Derek thanked Alvarez and left first, his phone already in hand, fingers moving fast. Samantha lingered for a moment at the door. "Mom, we'll talk later," she said softly, but the warmth in her voice was gone. When they were gone, Alvarez sighed. "You'll need to be careful, Mrs. Hartman. Money has a way of changing people." I nodded. "It doesn't change them," I said. "It reveals them." Outside, the sky had turned gray. The rain from last night had followed me here. I stood on the courthouse steps, holding the key in my hand, its golden edge catching the dull light. For the first time, it felt less like a gift and more like a warning. As I slipped it back into my pocket, I caught my reflection in the glass door, older, smaller, but not broken. When grief meets greed, I murmured to myself, mourning ends too soon. The road to Vermont stretched like a ribbon of gray through the fog. I hadn't told anyone I was leaving. I wrote a short note to Samantha, taking a few days to rest, and left it on the kitchen counter beside the cold coffee she never touched when she visited. I didn't owe her more than that. Not anymore. The suitcase sat in the passenger seat, the letter and the key tucked safely inside. The photograph of the red door was wedged into the visor, and every time I looked up, it was there, daring me forward. The miles rolled by in silence. Fields blurred into forests, forests into endless white. The snow had started early this year, the kind that covers everything, making even lies look clean. Edward's voice played in my head, low and steady. Never go to Rosewood. He'd said it like a man warning someone away from a fire he'd built himself. I used to think he meant to protect me. Now I wasn't sure. By the time I crossed into Vermont, the world had narrowed to gray skies and tire tracks. I stopped at a small diner off the highway, the kind that hadn't changed since the 70s. The waitress poured me coffee without asking. At the counter, 2 men in work jackets were talking, their voices low but clear enough for me to hear. You hear about that old Hartman property? Rosewood? Turns out it's sitting on a gold mine, oil under the whole damn valley. Figures. The guy was always into something, the other replied. Shame he's dead. His wife will cash out, I bet. The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered against the saucer. Oil. Edward had told me it was just farmland, worthless and empty. The waitress looked at me kindly. You okay, ma'am? I forced a small smile. Yes, thank you. But my heart was pounding. I reached into my coat pocket, feeling the shape of the key through the fabric. It felt heavier now, as if it had been holding its breath for years. When I stepped back outside, the wind cut like glass. The clouds hung low, swallowing the mountains whole. I stood there for a long moment, letting the cold bite at my skin until my thoughts cleared. He had lied to me, not to protect me, to protect something else. Back in the car, I unfolded the map Hanley had marked. A thin red circle labeled Rosewood Valley bled across the page. 12 miles to go. The drive grew darker as I climbed the narrow road. Trees pressed close on both sides, their branches like arms reaching toward the car. The radio crackled, then went silent, leaving only the hum of the engine and the sound of my heartbeat. As I approached the crest of the hill, a faded wooden sign appeared at the roadside. Rosewood, 12 miles. The paint had peeled away, but the name was still legible, burned into the board like a scar. I pulled over for a moment and rolled down the window. The air smelled of pine and iron, sharp and cold. 12 miles, I whispered. 12 million. The words felt bitter in my mouth. I looked at the photo one more time, the red door, the burnt letters, and slipped it back into my coat. Whatever waited for me there, it wasn't just about property. It was about truth, the kind that costs more than it gives back. I pressed the key between my fingers until the edge dug into my skin. The sting grounded me. All right, Edward, I said softly, starting the engine. Let's see what you were so afraid of. The tires crunched over the frost as the car crawled forward. Behind me, the diner lights flickered once and disappeared into the fog. Ahead, the valley waited, silent, white, and watching. By the time I reached the gates, the sun was already dying behind the hills. The road curved through rows of bare trees, their branches scraping the roof of the car like whispers of warning. I slowed to a stop when I saw it. A pair of wrought iron gates, tall and black, the letters Rosewood Estate curling across them in faded gold. The key slid easily into the old lock. For a second, I hesitated. The metal was cold against my fingers, and the memory of Edward's voice echoed again. Never go to Rosewood. I turned the key anyway. The sound of the latch giving way was sharp and final. The gates opened onto a long gravel path lined with dead rose bushes. The air smelled of cedar and rain. I had imagined an abandoned farm, maybe a few broken fences and a rotting barn, but as I drove closer, something rose from the fog. A house, vast and elegant, its redwood frame glowing faintly under the gray sky. It wasn't a farm. It was a mansion. When I stepped out of the car, the wind caught my scarf and carried it toward the porch. The wooden steps creaked under my boots. The front door was exactly like the photograph, faded red paint, the name Rosewood burned into the wood. For a moment I stood there, my hand hovering over the handle, my heart pounding. Then I turned the key. The door opened with a sigh, as though the house had been holding its breath. Inside, the air was still, thick with the scent of old wood and thyme. Sunlight spilled through the high windows, catching dust like golden snow. Every piece of furniture was covered with white sheets, but beneath them I could see the outlines of beauty. Polished oak, velvet chairs, oil paintings. Edward hadn't left a ruin. He had built a secret kingdom. On the grand piano sat a single object, a sealed envelope with my name written in his handwriting. Beside it lay a dried rose and a small silver flash drive. My hands shook as I tore open the envelope. "If you're reading this, Lil," the letter began, "then you've broken the promise. Good. It's time you know what Rosewood really is." The words blurred as I read on. Edward wrote about the years he'd spent rebuilding the place, how he'd poured money into it quietly, how he'd hidden things here for safekeeping, things that could destroy everything he'd built if they fell into the wrong hands. "I wasn't hiding this from you," he wrote. "I was hiding it for you." My knees nearly gave out. I sat on the piano bench, the letter trembling in my hands. He'd spent decades building this for me, and yet he died without ever telling me why. I plugged the flash drive into the small laptop beside the letter. The screen flickered to life. Edward's face appeared, older, worn, but unmistakably him. "If you're watching this, Lil, then you've broken the promise," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine through the screen. "Good. It's time you know. Rosewood isn't what you think it is. I kept you away because I needed to finish something that could protect you long after I'm gone." He paused, glancing over his shoulder as though someone might be listening. "It wasn't just love I hid here, but protection." The video ended abruptly, leaving only my reflection in the dark screen. My pulse roared in my ears. I looked around the silent room, at the covered furniture, the faint smell of cedar, the walls that seemed to hum with his memory. Protection. From what? From whom? Outside, the last light of day slipped behind the mountains, casting the house in a deep gold glow. I stood slowly, clutching the letter. Somewhere inside this mansion lay the answer to why he lied and why he was afraid. The next morning, I woke to the sound of tires grinding against gravel. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the echoes of a dream still clinging to my half-sleep. But then a car door slammed, and another, sharp and impatient. I pulled the curtain aside. A black SUV was parked at the bottom of the driveway. Two figures emerged. My daughter, Samantha, stepped out first, her blonde hair pulled into a tight knot, her expression unreadable. Beside her was Derek, my son-in-law, dressed in an immaculate gray suit that didn't belong anywhere near a farm. His posture was stiff, his smile thinner than ice. I didn't move. I just watched as they walked toward the house, their shapes growing larger in the window's reflection, like ghosts summoned by unfinished business. When I opened the front door, Samantha's tone was already clipped. "Mom, you shouldn't be here. We tried calling. Didn't you get our messages?" "I did," I said calmly. "I needed time." Derek's eyes scanned the house behind me, hungry. "Quite a place. I thought it was just an old property. Didn't realize Dad left something like this behind." "He never mentioned it to you?" I asked, watching his jaw tighten. "Not in detail," he said smoothly. "But I handle investments for a living, remember? And a property like this shouldn't sit idle. You might want help managing it, for your own peace of mind." I almost laughed. "Is that what this is? Peace of mind?" Samantha stepped between us, her voice soft, rehearsed. "Mom, please. We just want to make sure everything's handled right. Dad trusted Derek with finances. Maybe it's time you do too." There it was, the first crack in the illusion of concern, the polite tones, the gentle phrases, the mask of family care. I'd seen it before in business dinners, when Edward's colleagues smiled while sharpening their knives. "I think your father trusted me more than you realize," I said, closing the door halfway behind me. Derek tilted his head. "That's admirable. But these things can get complicated. Taxes, estate value, transfer rights. You'd hate to make a mistake." "I've made plenty," I said. "But not this time." The air thickened. Samantha's eyes flickered, uncertain, but Derek kept smiling that empty smile. "Look, no one's trying to take anything from you. We just want to make sure it's all handled properly." I leaned on the doorframe, studying them. "You drove 4 hours uninvited to make sure I handle my husband's gift properly? That's touching." Samantha's voice cracked slightly. "Mom, don't do this. You don't understand what you're stepping into." Her words froze me. What you're stepping into, like a warning or a confession. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, glancing at Derek. He cut her off with a curt, "Nothing. She's just upset." But I'd seen the flicker of fear in her eyes, not greed, fear. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. "How long have you known about this place?" Samantha looked away. Derek answered for her. "Since last year. Edward told me briefly. He was planning some trust paperwork, and he wanted my input. You know how private he was. He said Rosewood wasn't safe until everything was finalized." "Not safe?" I repeated. He nodded. "That's why he asked me to oversee it, to make sure it didn't fall into the wrong hands." I almost smiled at the irony. "And now, of course, you believe you're the right hands." Derek's charm faltered for a second, replaced by the steel beneath. "I'm trying to help, Lillian. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The way he said my name, flat, stripped of warmth, made something inside me shift. For the first time, I saw the danger Edward must have sensed years ago. Not just greed, but the kind that came dressed in family ties and financial advice. "You came here for more than conversation," I said. "What is it you really want?" Derek took a slow breath. "Oh, control, just until things are settled. You don't need the stress. We'll take care of it." "No," I said simply. "You won't." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the morning fog. Derek stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're making a mistake." "I've made worse ones," I replied. He exhaled hard, turned, and walked toward the SUV. Samantha lingered for a moment, her eyes glassy. "Mom, please, don't go digging where you shouldn't." And then she was gone. When the car disappeared down the road, I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. Edward's voice echoed faintly from the past. It wasn't just love I hid here, but protection. I looked at the golden key hanging by the door. Now I understood. Rosewood wasn't meant to keep me out. It was meant to keep them away. Night fell fast at Rosewood, the kind of dark that made every creak sound like a secret being whispered through the walls. I couldn't sleep. Not after Samantha's warning, not after Derek's smirk. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the house itself was waiting for me to make a move. The laptop still sat on the oak desk in the study, exactly where I'd left it after watching Edward's first message. Its screen glowed faintly, a single icon pulsing at the center. Play next. I hesitated only for a moment before clicking it. The video opened to Edward's face, pale under a single hanging light. His eyes looked older than I remembered, his voice steady but urgent. "If you're watching this, it means they've found you," he said. "Don't be afraid, Lillian. Understand them. Fear clouds reason, and reason is what they'll underestimate in you." I froze. "They've found you." The words hit harder than thunder. He knew this would happen. He knew Samantha and Derek would come. Edward continued, his tone low and deliberate. "Rosewood isn't what they think. It isn't just land, it's leverage, proof of everything they tried to take. I hid what mattered here because I couldn't trust anyone else to guard it, not even our daughter. My breath caught. Not even Samantha? I whispered to the empty room. He seemed to answer me through the screen. Love can be corrupted when money enters the room. I saw it happen once. I refused to see it twice. He leaned closer to the camera, eyes narrowing. There are documents here. Contracts, bank transfers, things that will explain everything. But they're buried deeper than paper. You'll need help to find them. Someone you already know is waiting for you. The screen flickered, and for a moment I thought the video had ended. Then his voice returned, softer now, almost gentle. When the time comes, trust the one who stayed loyal after everyone else walked away. I frowned, trying to decipher his words. The one who stayed loyal? Could he mean Hanley? Or someone else? Someone I hadn't met yet? The video paused again, and I noticed something in the corner of the frame, a shadow moving behind Edward. He glanced off camera, just once, as if someone had entered the room. Then the feed cut to black. My pulse quickened. I replayed that last second over and over, searching for a clue in his expression. Fear? Regret? No. It was resolve. He'd been preparing for this moment all along. The silence after the video ended felt immense. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen. For years, I'd seen myself as Edward's widow, his follower, his kept secret. But tonight, I felt something shift. He had built Rosewood to protect me. Now it was my turn to protect what he left behind. The house creaked again, soft footsteps on old wood. I turned off the lamp, holding my breath. The wind outside moaned through the trees, but this sound was closer, heavier. I gripped the armrest of the chair. Then it stopped. I stood, walked toward the hall, and glanced down the corridor. Nothing but moonlight spilling across the floorboards. Still, I could feel it. Someone had been here before me. Someone had been keeping watch. I returned to the desk, sliding Edward's letter from the drawer. My fingers brushed the words he had written. Trust no one. But tonight, his voice had said the opposite. Trust the one who stayed loyal. I set the letter beside the key, their meanings colliding. Maybe trust and caution weren't opposites. Maybe they were two sides of the same shield. The morning after the second video, the house felt different. The rain had stopped, but the silence that followed carried its own kind of storm. I made coffee I couldn't taste, sat at the kitchen table surrounded by sunlight that felt too bright for the heaviness inside me. Then, tires crunched outside on the gravel. When I opened the door, Ms. Alvarez stood there, my husband's attorney, holding a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who brings news that changes lives. Mrs. Hartman, she greeted softly, I thought it would be better if we spoke in person. I stepped aside. If this is about Derek and Samantha, you might be too late. They've already come. I know, she said. They called my office this morning. She placed her briefcase on the table, unlatched it, and laid out several files. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic. They've hired a separate counsel. They're challenging your ownership of Rosewood. I blinked. Challenging? On what grounds? They're claiming you're unfit to manage the estate due to grief and emotional distress, she explained. They'll try to prove you're not capable of overseeing your late husband's holdings. Essentially, they want control of Rosewood declared invalid and transferred to them for safekeeping. I let out a quiet laugh. Safekeeping. That's one word for theft. Alvarez didn't smile. They've already filed preliminary paperwork. A hearing is being scheduled at the county court. If we don't act quickly, the estate could be frozen. My hands tightened around the edge of the table. Edward warned me about this, I said. He said they'd come for what isn't theirs. Her gaze softened. He prepared for it. There's a secondary will, one he signed 6 months before his passing. It includes a clause affirming full rights of ownership to you, with no trustees or co-beneficiaries. Then that's it, isn't it? They lose. It's not that simple, she replied. The copy I have is valid, but to enforce it, we need the original notarized version, and that document is still at the county archives in town. You'll need to sign an affidavit to confirm your mental fitness before we can retrieve it." I looked at her, the absurdity of it sinking in. So they want to prove I've lost my mind by forcing me to prove I haven't? She exhaled through her nose, a small smile breaking through the tension. Essentially, yes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked steadily, each sound like a countdown. I thought of Edward's letter, his warnings, the videos, the golden key. Every piece of this puzzle had been placed carefully, deliberately, by a man who saw the storm long before it arrived. Alvarez's tone softened. "Edward was a careful man, Mrs. Hartman. He trusted me with a sealed envelope, one I was instructed to deliver only if this kind of dispute arose. I think it's time you read it." She handed me a small brown envelope, identical to the first one Hanley had given me. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single line written in Edward's familiar hand. "If they question your sanity, let your actions speak for you. Appear weak until strength is the only thing they can see." I closed my eyes, feeling the quiet fire of his confidence settle in my chest. Alvarez watched me carefully. "What does it say?" "Nothing they'd understand," I murmured. Then I looked up. "When is the hearing?" "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, County Courthouse." "Then I'll be there," I said, "and I'll sign whatever I need to." She gathered her files and stood. "This will be difficult, but you have the truth on your side. Remember, they're not after your mind, Mrs. Hartman. They're after your signature." That line struck something deep inside me. I thought of the way Derek had looked at me yesterday, all false sympathy and hidden hunger. He didn't see me as a person, only a pen with a hand attached. I walked her to the door, the sunlight spilling through the open hallway. "Tell them I'll sign," I said quietly, "but not what they expect." She nodded, understanding more than I said, and left. When her car disappeared down the road, I stood at the window, watching the wind move through the trees. My reflection stared back from the glass, older, steadier, unafraid. The house had gone silent hours ago, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still awake. Every floorboard seemed to breathe. The windows clicked against their frames as if whispering warnings. I had spent the whole evening studying Alvarez's files, page after page of financial documents that made less sense the longer I stared. I rubbed my eyes and stacked the papers neatly on the desk. That was when I heard it, a faint noise from the back of the house. Not the wind, something heavier, a step, then another. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and walked toward the hallway. The light cut through the dark in narrow lines. The sound came again, from the storage shed behind the kitchen. My pulse quickened. "Who's there?" I called out, but only the echo answered. I pushed the door open. The smell of dust and old wood filled the air. Boxes were stacked high, covered with sheets. For a second, I thought I saw movement. Then a figure turned toward me slowly. "Mr. Hanley?" My voice cracked. The old lawyer straightened up, startled but calm. His hair was whiter than I remembered, his clothes worn and dusty. "Mrs. Hartman," he said softly, "you weren't supposed to see me like this." "What are you doing here?" I asked. He wiped his hands on a cloth. "Mr. Hartman asked me to stay, to keep Rosewood in order until you came. I've been living in the caretaker's quarters." "You've been here all this time?" He nodded. "Waiting. He told me you'd need help when the wolves came." The words made me shiver. "What wolves, Hanley?" He reached into a crate and pulled out a small metal case, setting it gently on the table. The light from my flashlight reflected off its surface. A label was taped to it, written in Edward's hand, "Truth Files." "He said to give this to you when the time was right," Hanley continued. "Everything Derek ever did, every forged signature, every hidden transfer, it's in here." I stared at the case. "You mean he knew, all along?" Hanley's eyes softened. "He knew enough to prepare. Mr. Hartman was no fool." I felt anger and relief clash inside me. Edward had planned this. Every secret, every warning, it all led here. "Does anyone else know about these files?" I asked. "No one," Hanley said. "But if Derek suspects, he'll come for them. That's why he sent those letters to the bank. He's trying to erase his trail." I clenched my jaw. "Then we'll make sure his trail leads straight to him." Hanley gave a faint smile. "I see why he trusted you." I opened the metal case. Inside were several USB drives, sealed folders, and a handwritten note from Edward. Just 3 words: "Use this wisely." My hands trembled. Not from fear this time, but purpose. "Hanley," I said quietly, "thank you for keeping his trust." He nodded. "He believed you'd finish what he started." Outside, a branch snapped. Both of us turned. Headlights swept briefly across the window, then disappeared. Hanley whispered, "They're watching the house." "Let them watch," I said. "Tomorrow they'll see what's coming." I picked up the metal case and held it close. For the first time since Edward's death, I didn't feel lost. I felt ready. Hanley stepped back into the shadows. "I'll stay nearby," he said. "If you need me, light the lantern on the porch." At sunrise, I sat at Edward's old desk with the metal case open in front of me. The air was cold, sharp with the smell of cedar and paper. Inside were 3 USB drives, each labeled in his handwriting. I plugged the first one into the laptop. The screen flickered, and then Edward appeared, sitting in his office, calm, but with that quiet tension I knew too well. "Derek brought me a deal once," he said, voice low. "Too good to be true, because it was forged." He held up a document for the camera, pointing to the signature line. "He copied my handwriting perfectly. I let him think he'd fooled me. It was the only way to find out how deep it went." I leaned closer, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. Edward's eyes met the lens like he was staring through time itself. He used a company he built offshore, a shell in the Cayman Islands. Every transfer went through accounts I traced back to him. I could have confronted him. I could have ended it then, but I needed proof that would stand. And he paused, adjusting his glasses. "So I signed a second set of documents, one real, one false, and recorded everything. They thought they'd stolen millions. In truth, they only signed their own confessions." The screen showed Derek entering Edward's office, smiling that same smile I'd seen at my door 2 nights ago. Samantha followed, her voice soft, careful. "Dad, Derek says this deal will secure the family's future," she said. "You should trust him." Edward looked at her for a long time before replying, "I trust people who earn it, not people who ask for it." Derek laughed lightly, brushing it off. "Come on, sir. You know this will make us all comfortable." Edward signed the papers, his pen gliding slowly across the page. The camera angle shifted, revealing another lens hidden behind the bookshelves. I froze. He'd filmed everything. When Derek and Samantha left the room, Edward turned back to the camera. "He thinks I don't know, but greed has a pattern. You give it one opportunity, it always asks for 2. I'll let him have this victory, and when he overreaches, that's when the truth will surface." The video faded to black for a moment, then returned to Edward sitting in a different setting, his home office, the year before he died. He looked tired, older, but there was pride in his voice now. "I let them believe they won," he said. "I needed them to show the world who they really were. I built Rosewood not just as protection, but as a trap. Every cent they moved, every asset they claimed, it all leads back here." He leaned closer, voice softening. "Lillian, if you're watching this, I know it means I'm gone, but you need to know, I didn't build this place for profit. I built it so you'd have proof, even when I couldn't defend myself." I felt my throat tighten. The man I'd buried was not the husband I thought I knew. He'd been fighting a quiet war, protecting me without ever saying a word. On the screen, Edward smiled faintly. "You always said I kept too many secrets. Maybe this one will forgive the rest." The video ended, the room returning to silence. I sat back, letting out a shaky breath. "He forgave with one hand," I whispered, and loaded the gun with the other. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stared at the empty chair across from me, imagining him there, calm, strategic, ready for anything. Then I looked at the folder Hanley had mentioned, buried under the stack of documents. Inside were bank records, transfers, timestamps, and one notarized page titled Statement of Intent. In Edward's handwriting, "If this reaches Lillian, it means the fraud has surfaced. Use the truth. Do not hide behind grief." I folded the page carefully, placed it beside the USB, and felt something change inside me. The fear that had followed me since the funeral was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger, it was clarity. By afternoon, Alvarez was back at Rosewood. She stepped into the study, scanning the files spread across the desk. "You've been busy," she said quietly. "Edward was the busy one," I replied. "He left me the whole map. I just had to follow it." Hanley entered behind her, hat in hand, nodding respectfully. "Everything she needs is in those drives," he said. "Enough to end Derek's game for good." Alvarez adjusted her glasses and opened her laptop. "We can move fast. With these records, I can freeze his accounts within 24 hours. Fraud, forgery, offshore laundering, it's all here." I shook my head. "Not yet." She looked up. "Not yet?" "They expect me to act desperate. If we strike now, they'll prepare. I want them relaxed, confident. I want them to think I'm giving up." Hanley smiled faintly. "That's exactly what Edward would have done." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "We'll invite them to dinner. Samantha and Derek. A reunion, just the three of us. I'll tell them I'm ready to settle things peacefully. While they're toasting their victory, we'll let Edward tell his story one last time." Alvarez raised an eyebrow. "You mean the videos?" "Exactly," I said. "They wanted me to sign everything away. Let's give them what they asked for, just not the way they planned." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You'll need to stay calm. Once that footage plays, it'll be chaos." "I can handle chaos," I said. "I lived with it for 25 years. Now I get to end it." Hanley placed a small recorder on the table. "For backup, in case anyone tries to twist the story afterward." I smiled. "Always 2 steps ahead, just like Edward." We sat together in silence for a moment, the kind that feels like strategy forming in the air. Outside, the sky darkened with the weight of an approaching storm. Alvarez closed her briefcase. "I'll prepare the legal notice and keep the press out of it for now. But when this is over, Lillian, you'll have to decide what comes next." "I already have," I said. "Once they know the truth, I'll make sure Rosewood stands for something better than their greed." Hanley gave a quiet nod. "Then let's set the table, Mrs. Hartman." The invitation went out 2 days later. A simple message to Samantha. "Dinner at Rosewood. Let's talk peace." She replied within the hour. Derek, of course, would come too. He always did when money was involved. By sunset, the house was ready. Candles flickered on the long dining table. The air smelled faintly of wine and rain-soaked wood. I had set 3 plates, just enough for family, and one final reckoning. Their car pulled up right on time. Samantha stepped in first, polite smile, eyes searching. Derek followed, carrying that familiar arrogance like a suit he never took off. "Mom," Samantha began carefully, "we're glad you reached out. It's been hard for all of us." "I'm sure it has," I said, pouring the wine. "Please, sit. We have a lot to clear up tonight." Derek raised his glass before sitting. "It's good you're being reasonable. The sooner we finalize things, the sooner everyone can move forward." "Finalize," I repeated. Such a practical word for a family dinner. Samantha placed a stack of papers on the table, transfer forms, printed and waiting for my signature. Her hand trembled slightly as she slid them toward me. "It's just a formality, Mom. You'll still have security, comfort, everything you need." I looked at her, then at the man sitting beside her, pretending to be calm. "Comfort," I said softly. "Yes, that's what you've always been after, isn't it?" Derek leaned back. "There's no need for hostility. We all want closure." I smiled, standing. "Then let's start with the truth." I walked to the television in the corner of the room and inserted a small drive. The screen came alive instantly, footage from Rosewood's office archives, time-stamped and clear. Derek's voice filled the room. "Sign it, and she'll never notice," he said on the recording. "By the time she does, it'll all be in our name." Samantha froze. Derek's glass stopped mid-air. "What is this?" he snapped. "Proof," I said. "The kind you can't shred." He stood abruptly. "You don't know what you're doing. This doesn't prove anything." "Sit down," I said quietly. "Or should I call the county clerk and let them watch too?" He glared at me, but he sat. Samantha's hands shook as she stared at the screen. "You recorded him?" she whispered. "No," I said. "You did. When you convinced me to let him handle things, you brought him into this family. You gave him every chance to show who he really was." Tears formed in her eyes. "Mom, I didn't know." "Didn't you?" I asked gently. "You just didn't want to." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the slow drip of wine spilling from Derek's overturned glass, spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. He finally spoke, his voice sharp and shaking. "You think this ruins me? You think anyone will believe some old recording?" "I don't need them to believe it," I said, stepping closer. "I just need you to." He clenched his jaw, realizing too late that his power was gone. Samantha looked between us, her face pale, guilt written in every line. I unplugged the drive and slipped it into my pocket. "Dinner's over," I said quietly. No one moved. Derek's rage was a silent storm ready to break. Samantha lowered her head, whispering something I couldn't hear. As I walked toward the door, I felt no triumph, only relief, like the air before a thunderclap finally breaks. Behind me, Derek shouted, "You'll regret this!" I turned, meeting his eyes for the last time. "No, haha," I said. "I'm finally done regretting." The sound of the door slamming behind me echoed through the halls long after they were gone. I stood alone in the dining room, the smell of wine and burnt candle wax still hanging in the air. The table looked like a battlefield, papers torn, glasses overturned, one of the candles extinguished halfway through its burn. I picked up a broken piece of porcelain from the floor, part of the plate Samantha had dropped when the recording played. The shard was sharp, small enough to fit in my palm. It caught the light like a fragment of the past. Behind me, footsteps. Derek stormed back into the room, face red, eyes wild. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You embarrassed me, in my own family." "In your family?" I said quietly. "You married into it. You poisoned it." He stepped closer, voice trembling with rage. "You'll lose everything for this stunt. I'll take it all back." I met his stare without flinching. "Then start with your dignity. It's the only thing you still own." Samantha appeared behind him, her voice breaking. "Stop it! Please, Derek, just stop!" He turned on her, shouting something I couldn't even process. The sound of his anger filled the room like fire spreading through dry wood. Then he left, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The silence that followed was unbearable. Samantha stood frozen, eyes wet, lips trembling. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. "He said it was just business," she whispered. I believed him. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. She took a step forward. "Mom, what have we done?" I shook my head. "You tell me." She tried to speak again but couldn't. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the broken glasses, then set it back down carefully. "He ruined us," she said finally, voice barely above a breath. "No," I replied softly. "We ruined ourselves when we stopped listening to each other." She turned away, crying quietly. When she finally left, I stayed where I was, staring at the mess that used to be our family dinner. The candlelight flickered weakly, reflecting off the wine-stained porcelain. It looked like blood drying after a wound that no one could clean. 3 days passed. The house felt heavier with every hour. I hadn't heard from Samantha since the dinner. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her apartment sat empty when Alvarez sent someone to check. Derek, on the other hand, was everywhere. on TV, online, parading his lies in front of anyone who would listen. He told the press I'd fabricated evidence, that I was a bitter widow destroying my own family. He even called me mentally unstable. The words would have hurt once. Now they only confirmed that the trap had worked. A guilty man always screams the loudest. Still, I couldn't shake the silence from my daughter. Guilt twists sharper than hate. Maybe she couldn't face what she'd helped create. Maybe Derek had convinced her to disappear. I didn't know which hurt more, the thought that she was gone or that she'd left by choice. Alvarez arrived at noon, rain on her coat and fury in her eyes. Hanley followed close behind, holding a folded newspaper. "He's feeding lies to the media," Alvarez said, tossing it on the table. "He's claiming you forged Edward's signature on the new will." I almost smiled. "Let him dig. He'll only find his own fingerprints." Hanley set down his hat. "We can't just sit back. We need something stronger than words. Proof." "There's more," Alvarez said, pulling a file from her bag. "I found an old drive Edward registered under a secondary name, E.H. Holdings. It was stored in the county archives, exactly where the original will was notarized. Inside, we found email records." She opened the laptop and turned the screen toward me. Dozens of messages filled the screen. The sender, Derek Wells. The subject lines were blunt. "Transfer confirmation. Don't tell her yet. She'll sign anything if she thinks it's from you." My throat went dry. "You're sure this is real?" Alvarez nodded. "We verified it through the bank's digital log." He was sloppy. One of his assistants forwarded the emails to a shared server. "They're admissible." Hanley exhaled, long and slow. "This is it, Mrs. Hartman. This will bury him." I stared at the screen. The messages scrolled endlessly, one after another, a trail of greed, deceit, and arrogance. But among them was one that made me stop. From Derek, sent to Samantha. "Once the transfer clears, your mother will have no authority left. Just sign where I marked. Don't think about it." My hand trembled over the mouse. I whispered, "She really didn't know." Hanley placed a hand on my shoulder. "Then she deserves the truth as much as he deserves justice." Outside, the rain grew harder, hammering against the windows. Alvarez closed the laptop gently. "We'll take this to court. Let him try to shout over the evidence." I nodded, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I looked toward the photograph on the mantel, me, Edward, and Samantha at her graduation. Her smile then was real. So was mine. "Where did I lose you, Sam?" I said quietly. Was it the money or the silence before it? By the time the court date arrived, the air in the courthouse lobby felt electric. Reporters waited outside with cameras, hoping for a glimpse of the grieving widow turned scandal. I ignored them. I wasn't here to defend myself anymore. I was here to end this. Alvarez walked beside me, calm as stone. Hanley carried the sealed folders. Edward's records, Derek's forged documents, and the emails proving every transfer. "Once we file these," he said, "it's no longer about family. It's about law." Inside the courtroom, Derek sat at the defendant's table, smirking like he was already victorious. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, and he leaned back, confident. Samantha wasn't beside him. That silence, her absence, hurt more than I wanted to admit. The judge entered, an older man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The bailiff called the case, Hartman Estate versus Wells et al. When my name was spoken, Derek turned, meeting my gaze with mock sympathy. "You should have stayed quiet, Lillian," he said under his breath. "You don't win against men like me." I didn't answer. The sound of the gavel silenced everything else. Alvarez stood first. "Your Honor, this case concerns the illegal transfer of estate assets from Mrs. Lillian Hartman to her son-in-law, Mr. Derek Wells, through forged contracts and fabricated authorizations. We have the original documents, digital correspondence, and witness testimony from Mr. Hanley, who served as legal counsel to the deceased." She moved with precision, steady, clean, lethal, the kind of composure that kills arrogance faster than shouting ever could. Derek's attorney objected, muttering something about grief manipulation, but the judge waved him off. "Proceed," he said. Hanley took the stand, voice steady as a bell. "I witnessed Mr. Wells pressuring Mrs. Hartman to sign over her rights 2 weeks after her husband's death. I also confirmed that Mr. Wells submitted altered versions of the estate's trust deed." Alvarez displayed the projected emails, Derek's words lighting up the courtroom wall. Gasps rippled through the spectators. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Wells, do you deny sending these?" Derek's smirk faltered. I don't recall those exact messages." "Would you like us to authenticate them through your company's IP log?" Alvarez asked smoothly. Silence, the kind that seals a coffin. The judge looked unimpressed. "You'll answer the question at the formal hearing. For now, I'm freezing all contested assets pending investigation." I exhaled, quiet but steady. Alvarez wasn't done. "Your Honor, we are also filing a countersuit on behalf of Mrs. Hartman, civil damages for fraud, coercion, and defamation. Mr. Wells has publicly accused her of mental instability to divert attention from his crimes." Derek shot up. "That's absurd. She's lying. She's manipulating the court." The judge banged the gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Wells, or I'll hold you in contempt." He sat, jaw tight, his confidence cracking under the weight of evidence. The rest of the hearing blurred into legal language and signatures, but one sentence from the judge carved itself into my memory. "Justice moves slowly, Mrs. Hartman, but it never forgets." When it was over, I walked out into the corridor. Reporters shouted my name, flashes going off like lightning. I didn't stop. Alvarez joined me, speaking quietly. "We've won the first battle. He's cornered. The next hearing will finish it." I nodded, my voice low. "It's not about finishing him, Ms. Alvarez. It's about freeing my daughter from him." Hanley stepped up beside us. "The press will twist this however they can. Do you want me to make a statement?" "No," I said. "Let him talk. The more he speaks, the more truth he buries himself under." Outside, the sky was breaking open, sunlight spilling across the courthouse steps. It felt like a clean breath after years underwater. As we walked through the crowd, someone asked, "Mrs. Hartman, do you believe the law will give you justice?" It was almost midnight when the headlights cut across the long drive leading to Rosewood. I had just finished going through the day's court filings when I heard the engine stop. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like someone gathering courage before stepping into a memory. When the doorbell rang, I already knew who it was. Samantha stood there, soaked from the rain, her face pale and eyes rimmed with red. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the years of defiance had finally drained out of her. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I nodded and stepped aside. She hesitated before crossing the threshold, as if the house itself might reject her. The fire in the hearth flickered weakly, throwing gold across the walls. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands twisting the hem of her sleeve. I waited. Silence is sometimes the only truth that can't be twisted. Finally, she spoke. "He's gone." I frowned. "Gone where?" She looked up, eyes hollow. "Derek left. He took my car, the credit cards, the joint account, everything. When the story broke, he said I'd ruined him by not destroying the files. He said he never loved me, that I was just leverage." Her voice broke on the last word. For a moment, I said nothing. I'd imagined this confrontation 1,000 ways, anger, shouting, demands, but not this. Not my daughter sitting in front of me like a burned-out match. "Why didn't you come sooner?" I asked quietly. She stared at the fire. "Because I thought you hated me. After that dinner, after everything I said, how could I face you?" "I don't hate you," I said. "I hated what you became. There's a difference." Tears filled her eyes. "I thought I was helping him. He said Dad's money was being wasted, that you didn't know how to handle it. I believed him because it was easier than believing I'd been wrong." She buried her face in her hands. "I destroyed everything, Mom." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "No. You let someone convince you that loyalty meant silence. That's not destruction. It's blindness. And now your eyes are open." She shook her head. I don't deserve forgiveness. I didn't say you did, I replied. But you can still make things right. She looked up, confused. How? By telling the truth, publicly. The emails, the forged contracts, they mean more coming from you. You were inside it. You saw what he did. Her face went white. You want me to testify against him? Yes, I said. And not for me, for yourself, for the woman who believed him, and for the one who'll never believe anyone like him again. The fire snapped loudly between us. For a long while, she didn't answer. Then slowly, she nodded. If it means ending this, I'll do it. I felt something uncoil inside me, a small, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we weren't completely broken. Samantha wiped her eyes and looked around the room. It's strange, she murmured. This house feels different now. It's lighter, I said. When truth walks in, shadows have to leave. She managed a faint smile. I don't deserve your grace. You don't, I said honestly, but I'm giving it anyway. That's how we start again. Outside, the storm began to ease. She stood and walked to the window, watching the rain slow to a drizzle. When I left him, she whispered, he said I'd end up like ash, nothing left. I joined her, looking out into the wet darkness. Ash is what comes before fire, I said, and you're not done burning yet. She turned to me, tears glinting in the firelight. I'm sorry, Mom. I know, I said. Now let's make it mean something. The morning after Samantha returned, the rain stopped completely. The valley outside Rosewood glistened in pale gold, as if the world itself had decided to start over. I made coffee for both of us, but neither of us drank it. The silence was enough. While she showered upstairs, I walked into Edward's study. I hadn't been there since the night I found the recordings. Something in me needed closure, one last thread to pull before everything went public. The desk drawer stuck when I tried to open it. Inside, buried beneath old pens and a dried-up notebook, was an envelope, yellowed, unsealed. My name was written in that familiar, careful handwriting, "For Lillian, when you've learned enough to forgive me." I sat down and unfolded the letter. My love, it began, if you're reading this, it means the truth has already hurt you, and maybe healed you too. I never meant for Rosewood to become a wound between us. I built it because I didn't know how to say what mattered most. I trusted you more than I trusted myself. My eyes blurred. I kept reading. You always believed in people, even when they disappointed you. That's your strength and your curse. I spent my life trying to protect you from cruelty, but I forgot you were never fragile. You were just kind. And the world doesn't forgive kindness easily. I pressed the paper against my chest. The room smelled of cedar and dust and memory. If the day ever comes when our daughter stands against you, don't see her as your enemy. See her as lost like I once was. Give her a way back, even if it costs you the satisfaction of being right. That will be your real inheritance, the ability to forgive without forgetting. My throat tightened. I had done exactly that, given Samantha a way back, though it had burned to do it. And when you finally understand everything I've hidden here, remember this. The money, the land, the documents, they were never what I wanted you to have. I wanted you to see how far people will go for something that means nothing, and how you, without wanting it, will always stand taller than the ones who tried to own you. The last line stopped me cold. My true legacy isn't what I left behind. It's the woman you became while searching for it. I sat there for a long time, the letter shaking in my hands. All those years of silence between us had turned into words too heavy for one page. I folded it carefully, placed it back into the drawer, and closed it like closing a chapter. When I turned around, Samantha was standing in the doorway. Her eyes were swollen, her hair damp from the shower, but she looked steady. "Was that from him?" she asked. "Yes," I said quietly. "The last one." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "What did he say?" I smiled faintly. that forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, it just frees us from carrying it. She nodded, tears spilling before she could stop them. I reached out, and for the first time in years, she didn't pull away. The courthouse was packed that morning. Reporters filled every corner, microphones lined the steps, and flashes went off like lightning whenever a door opened. For weeks, the headlines had turned my family into a spectacle. Widow versus son-in-law, the Hartman scandal, the farm of secrets. But today wasn't about whispers anymore. It was about daylight. Alvarez met me at the entrance, her tone calm but firm. Derek's cornered. He'll try to play the victim now. Let him talk, but don't respond. We let the evidence do the speaking. Samantha stood beside me, pale but resolute. She'd filed her sworn affidavit that morning. Every confession, every message she'd saved, every manipulation Derek had pulled. Her hands trembled slightly as we walked inside, but her eyes didn't flinch. The judge took his seat, the gavel echoing across the courtroom. The hum of cameras outside faded into silence. Derek's lawyer spoke first, his voice slick and confident, trying to paint me as the scheming widow who twisted a grieving daughter against her husband. But then Alvarez stood. Her words were sharp, clean, precise. "The defense calls this an act of revenge," she said. "We call it the exposure of a fraud, a scheme planned by Mr. Wells to strip Mrs. Hartman of her estate and assets through deceit, coercion, and forgery." She presented the exhibits one by one, the recorded meetings, the emails, the falsified contracts. Each slide landed like a hammer. Then came the turning point, Samantha taking the stand. The entire room leaned forward. She adjusted the microphone, her voice shaking at first. "I thought I was helping my husband," she began. "He told me my mother couldn't manage her money, that it was best for everyone if we handled it. I believed him. But he used me. He used my love and my loyalty." Her voice strengthened as she continued. "When I saw the documents, the forged signatures, the offshore accounts, I realized he wasn't saving anything. He was stealing everything." Derek's lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Let her finish." Samantha looked directly at Derek. "You told me she was weak, that she'd break if we pushed hard enough, but you were wrong. She's stronger than both of us ever were." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Derek looked cornered, furious. He whispered something to his lawyer, but his face betrayed the panic beneath the polished arrogance. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't walk to the witness stand. I stood where I was, voice steady, but quiet. "I don't want vengeance," I said. "I want honesty. I want my family name to mean something again. And if truth costs us comfort, then so be it. I can live without comfort, but not without truth." The judge nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "This court will issue a ruling pending review of all evidence," he said. "But I will note, on record, that Mrs. Hartman's actions demonstrate extraordinary restraint and clarity under provocation. The law has a long memory, Mr. Wells. So does conscience." Derek's lawyer said something under his breath, but the gavel struck before he could continue. Outside, the reporters swarmed as we stepped into the sunlight. The flashes returned. The questions came like rain. "Mrs. Hartman, how does it feel to win? Will you rebuild Rosewood? What happens to Mr. Wells now?" I stopped at the top of the steps and looked into the crowd. "This wasn't a win," I said. "It was a reckoning. Truth doesn't whisper. It stands in daylight. And sometimes, daylight burns." The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat. The noise died down faster than I expected. Within days, the reporters left, the headlines faded, and the courthouse that once felt like a battlefield returned to its gray silence. Justice had been served, at least on paper. Derek was awaiting sentencing, and his accounts were frozen. Samantha moved back into the small apartment she'd rented before the trial. For the first time in months, the world around me wasn't demanding a reaction. It was asking for peace. Rosewood stood quiet under a soft spring sun. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt emptied, like it had exhaled at last. The scent of cedar filled the halls again, dust caught in the golden light spilling through the windows. The piano that had sat untouched for decades was now open. My hands hesitated over the keys, tracing the familiar scratches Edward once made when trying to learn a sonata. He never finished. Neither did I. But today, I pressed one note, soft, trembling, and let it linger. In the afternoon, a small group of women arrived, neighbors, widows, and retirees from town. Alvarez had helped me set up a modest community program, free workshops for older women who'd lost their financial footing after losing a spouse. Nothing grand, just quiet lessons in independence. We sat in the living room that had once been Edward's private study, now filled with laughter and cautious optimism. One woman, Ellen, asked me, "Do you ever regret it, Mrs. Hartman? Fighting back, I mean." I thought for a long moment before answering. "No," I said softly. "I regret waiting so long to believe I could." They smiled, and for the first time in a long while, so did I. Not the polite smile of a hostess, but the kind that comes from letting go. That evening, Samantha drove up to Rosewood. She brought flowers, wild lilacs, Edward's favorite, and placed them by the old gate. She stood there quietly before walking to the porch, where I was sitting with tea and a blanket around my shoulders. "I didn't know what to bring," she said. "You brought enough," I replied. She sat beside me. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was human. She looked around, taking in the farm, the house reborn into something warm. "It's beautiful now," she said. "It always was," I answered. "We just couldn't see it through the fear." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Do you think Dad would have been proud?" I looked out toward the horizon, where the fields met the fading light. "Maybe," I said, "but I don't think pride was what he wanted for us. He wanted peace, the kind that doesn't wear a crown." Samantha leaned her head on my shoulder. The air smelled of lilac and soil. For once, there was no tension, no secrets left to unearth, only quiet understanding. Inside, the lights flickered on, soft and golden. I glanced through the open door. The walls that had once guarded wealth now held stories of women learning, rebuilding, starting again. As night settled, Samantha rose to leave. She turned to me at the car door. "You look lighter, Mom," she said. "Maybe I finally am," I replied. "Peace doesn't make noise, Sam. It just stays." She smiled and drove off into the dusk. I watched the taillights disappear, then looked back at the porch, at the house that no longer belonged to secrets, but to healing. The sun was setting over Rosewood, painting the fields in the color of old gold. The air was still, the kind of silence that feels earned. From the porch, I could see the wind ripple through the grass like a sea of light. Once this view had frightened me, too vast, too full of ghosts. But now, it felt alive. It belonged not to the past, but to everyone who would walk this land after me. Children's laughter drifted from the yard. The women from the community had brought their grandchildren to visit the new Rosewood Learning Center. The barn, once a place of secrets, now housed easels, books, and bright tables for art classes. The scent of fresh paint mixed with the faint sweetness of lilacs growing near the gate. Inside, a bronze plaque had been mounted by the fireplace, the Hartman Foundation for Women's Independence. Alvarez had insisted it be visible to anyone who entered. I'd wanted it simple, but she said, "Lillian, legacies should stand tall, even if they were born from quiet wars." As the day dimmed, Samantha arrived with her daughter, my granddaughter, Julia. She was 6, all curls and curiosity. "Grandma," she said, holding something small in her palm, "I found this in the drawer." It was the golden key, the same one Edward had left me, polished now from years of touch. The edges had dulled, but it still caught the light like a small sun. Julia turned it over and asked, "What does it open?" I smiled. "Once, it opened a door to a secret," I said. "Now, it opens stories." She tilted her head, puzzled, then giggled. "Can I keep it?" "Yes," I said, placing it gently around her neck on a ribbon. "But remember, some keys aren't for doors. They're for hearts." Samantha stood by the doorway, watching. Her face was calm, unguarded. "You've turned this place into something beautiful," she said. "I just stopped letting it be haunted," I replied. "We all have to decide what our ghosts will build next." We walked outside together, the three of us. The sky burned orange and rose, streaked with long ribbons of fading light. The same fields that had once held oil wells and betrayal now shimmered with quiet purpose. Julia ran ahead, chasing the wind, the key bouncing against her chest. She called out, "Grandma, it's glowing!" I laughed softly. "Maybe it always did, sweetheart. Maybe we just needed the light to see it." As we reached the fence line, Samantha asked, "Do you ever miss it? The fight? The rush of proving everyone wrong?" I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said. "I think power is just noise. Peace is what stays when the noise fades." We stood in silence, watching Julia spin in the field, her laughter echoing into the evening. The farm that once hid lies now grew truth in every corner. The walls no longer whispered of betrayal, they hummed with life. I walked back to the porch and sat on the old wooden chair, the same spot where Edward once stood, sketching the horizon. I could almost hear his voice again, softer this time, not a warning, but a farewell. "Never go to Rosewood, Lillian," he'd said once. But I had. And it turned out Rosewood wasn't the place he feared. It was the part of me I'd never met. The sun dipped lower, and the light turned honey thick, spilling across the floorboards. Julia's laughter carried on the wind like music. I whispered to myself, he left me $12 million, but what I found here was worth far more. The camera of the world, if it were watching, would pull back now, past the fields, the glowing house, the winding road that led away into peace. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you liked my story. Love.